"Uncle, don't eat. They put something in your food," shouts poor girl in Millionaire's restaurant. Richard Thompson was about to take the first bite of his grilled salmon when a shrill voice cut through the refined atmosphere of the restaurant. A girl who looked about 10 years old with dirty clothes and messy hair pointed directly at his plate with wide, terrified eyes. "Uncle, don't eat! They put something in your food," she shouted, causing all the other diners to turn and stare. Richard froze with his fork in the air. His first instinct was to call security to remove this child, who clearly didn't belong there. The Pinnacle was the most expensive restaurant in New York City, frequented only by the city's elite. How had a street kid managed to get in? "What are you doing here, child?" he asked, slowly lowering his fork. "I saw it, Uncle. I saw the man in white sprinkle powder on your plate when you weren't looking," the girl insisted, taking hesitant steps toward his table. The restaurant's maitre d' appeared immediately, visibly distressed by the situation. "Mr. Thompson, 1,000 apologies. We'll remove this person right away," he said, signaling to 2 security guards. Richard raised his hand, stopping them. Something about the girl's desperate expression made him hesitate. Her brown eyes shone with a sincerity that couldn't be faked. "Wait," he said, studying her face. "What man in white?" "The one who brings the food." He looked around, took a little bag from his pocket, and tossed it into your food while you were on your phone, she explained quickly, as if afraid she wouldn't be believed. A chill ran down Richard's spine. He had indeed spent a few minutes checking emails on his phone while waiting for his meal. During that time, anyone could have approached his table. "How do you know it wasn't just regular seasoning?" he asked, still skeptical. "Because I've seen it before, Uncle. In the slum where I live, bad men do this to people who don't pay their debts. My neighbor got really sick after eating food with the same kind of powder." The businessman observed the girl more closely. Despite her ragged appearance, she spoke with a clarity and determination that impressed him. His business instincts, honed over decades of building an empire, rarely misled him about people's character. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily, Uncle. But everyone calls me M." "And how did you get in here, Em?" The girl lowered her eyes, ashamed. I came to ask for food in the kitchen. The back door was open and I saw you sitting alone. When I saw the man do that, I had to warn you." Richard looked at the plate in front of him. The salmon was perfectly presented, with colorful vegetables and a golden sauce that looked delicious. Nothing seemed amiss, except for the word of a street child he'd never met before. "Mr. Thompson," the maitre d' interjected, clearly nervous. "I can assure you all our staff are completely trustworthy. This child must be confused or—" "Bring me another plate," Richard interrupted, surprising everyone. "And I want this one sent to a lab for testing." The maitre d' paled. "Sir, is that really necessary? It could cause an unnecessary scandal." "That's exactly why I want it tested," Richard replied coolly. "If there's nothing wrong, there'll be no issue." While waiting for the new plate to arrive, Richard watched Emily, who remained by his table despite the disapproving glances from other diners. The girl had curly brown hair that clearly hadn't seen a salon in months, and her clothes, though clean, were patched in several places. "Em, why did you risk coming in here to warn me? You don't even know me." The girl looked at him with a seriousness that seemed far beyond her 10 years. "My grandmother always said doing what's right doesn't depend on knowing the person. If someone's in danger, we help." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard felt something stir in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd heard words so simple and genuine. In his world of business, every gesture had an ulterior motive. Every favor expected something in return. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," he remarked. "Was?" corrected Em, lowering her eyes. "She passed last year. Since then, it's just been me and my little sister, Sophie." "And where do you live?" "In Hopeville, on the other side of the city. We sleep in a shack Mrs. Dorothy lent us." Richard knew that area. It was one of the poorest neighborhoods on the south side, where he'd grown up before building his fortune. The memory of his own childhood hardships made him look at Em with even greater attention. The waiter brought the new dish, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Richard noticed it was a different employee from the one who had served the previous plate. "Where's the waiter who served me earlier?" he asked. "I believe Paul stepped out for a break, sir," replied the new waiter, avoiding Richard's gaze. "Paul?" Richard mentally noted the name. "How long has he worked here?" "Just a few weeks, sir." Richard and Emily exchanged a meaningful glance. The girl was clearly thinking the same thing he was. "Could you recognize the man you saw tampering with my food?" "Yes, uncle. He had black hair, was about your height, and had a small mark on his neck like a scar." Richard discreetly called the maitre d' and asked to see the employee records. When Paul's photo appeared, Em immediately confirmed. "That's him. He's the man who put powder in your food." The maitre d' looked visibly uneasy. "Mr. Thompson, Paul is a new employee, but he passed all background checks." "I want to speak with him immediately," Richard demanded. "I'm afraid he's already left, sir. His shift ended right after serving your table." Richard felt a mix of anger and concern. If Em was right, someone had tried to poison his food, and the prime suspect had conveniently disappeared. "Call the police," he ordered. "Sir, please, let's handle this discreetly," pleaded the maitre d'. "Think of the restaurant's reputation." "The restaurant's reputation matters far less to me than my life," Richard replied curtly. While waiting for the police to arrive, Richard offered Emily a chair. The girl hesitated, glancing around at the other customers watching her with curiosity and disapproval. "Don't mind them," said Richard. "You probably saved my life today. That gives you the right to sit wherever you like." Em smiled shyly and perched on the edge of the chair, as if ready to bolt at any moment. "Uncle, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why would anyone want to hurt you?" Richard sighed heavily. It was a question he'd been asking himself. When you have money and success, Em, sometimes it creates enemies. People who think you don't deserve what you have or who want to take your place. But did you do anything wrong to deserve this? The innocence of the question hit Richard like a punch to the gut. In recent years, he'd made many tough business decisions. He had fired employees, terminated contracts that harmed competitors, and made choices that prioritized profit over other considerations. That's a very complicated question, Em. Sometimes in the business world, we do things that might hurt people, even unintentionally. My grandma used to say there's always a way to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Richard looked at that 10-year-old girl who had risked her own safety to save a stranger and felt a pang of shame. When was the last time he had done something genuinely selfless? The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 detectives listened to Richard and Em's account, examined the suspicious plate, and requested the restaurant's employee records. "Mr. Thompson," said the lead investigator, a bald, middle-aged man. "We'll take the plate for lab analysis and look into this employee, Paul. In the meantime, I recommend extra caution with your safety." "I already have personal security," Richard replied. "But apparently it's not enough." "And the girl?" the investigator asked, glancing at Em. "Emily is my guest," Richard said firmly. "Without her, I'd probably be in the hospital right now." After the police left, Richard noticed Em was restless, constantly looking toward the exit. "What's wrong, Em? Are you worried about something?" It's getting late, Uncle. I need to go home. My sister Sophie must be waiting for me, and she gets scared when it gets dark." Richard checked his watch. It was already past 7 in the evening. "How old is your sister?" 7. "She's smarter than me, but she's still too little to be alone for too long." The image of a 7-year-old alone in a slum while her older sister went out to find food struck Richard deeply. He remembered his own childhood, when his mother worked 3 jobs and he took care of his younger brother. "I'll have my driver take you home," he offered. Em's eyes widened. "In your car?" "But I don't want to be a bother, Uncle. You saved my life today, Em. Taking you home is the least I can do." On the way to Hopeville, Richard talked more with Em. He learned she had stopped going to school to care for her sister, that they survived mostly on donations and small jobs she managed to get at traffic lights. "And your parents?" he asked carefully. "I never knew my father. My mum, she left when Sophie was born, said she couldn't raise 2 kids alone." The pain in Em's voice was clear, but she spoke without self-pity, just stating the facts of life. "So the two of you have been on your own since then?" "No, Uncle. Our grandma took care of us until she got sick. After that, Mrs. Dorothy, who was her friend, let us live in the empty shack in her backyard." When they reached Hopeville, Richard was shocked by the conditions. The streets were unpaved, full of potholes that turned into mud puddles when it rained. The houses were makeshift structures of wood and brick, some without plaster, others painted in bright colors trying to brighten the poverty-stricken landscape. The driver stopped in front of a small concrete house where a black woman around 50 stood at the door with a worried expression. "That's Mrs. Dorothy," Em explained. "I'll call her to meet you." The woman approached the car cautiously, clearly wary. When Em quickly explained what had happened, Mrs. Dorothy looked at Richard with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. This girl has a heart of gold, but sometimes she gets into dangerous situations trying to help others. Actually, Mrs. Dorothy, I'm the one who should be thanking you. Em probably saved my life today." At that moment, a younger girl appeared at the door, clearly Sophie. Even from a distance, Richard could see she had the same expressive eyes as her sister, but with a rounder face and straighter hair. "Em!" Sophie shouted, running toward them. "I thought you weren't coming back." The sisters' reunion was touching. Sophie clung to Em as if she hadn't seen her in days, even though they'd only parted that morning. "Sophie, I want you to meet Uncle Richard. He's really nice." The younger girl peered at Richard through the car window and waved shyly. "He has a really pretty car," she remarked, making everyone laugh. Richard stepped out of the car and crouched to Sophie's level. "Nice to meet you, Sophie. Your sister's a hero, you know." "I know," Sophie replied solemnly. "She always takes care of everyone." Watching the two girls together, Richard felt a strange sensation in his chest. There was something about them that reminded him of his own childhood, of the struggle to survive and keep the family together. "Mrs. Dorothy," he said, standing up, "are the girls well taken care of here?" "I do what I can, sir, but I won't lie. Sometimes it's hard. I don't have much myself. I work as a cleaner, and my husband's been out of work for 6 months." Richard took out his wallet and pulled out some bills. "Please take this, to help with the girls' expenses." Mrs. Dorothy looked at the money, then at Richard, clearly torn between need and pride. "Sir, this is too much. Not compared to the life Em saved today," Richard insisted. Reluctantly, Mrs. Dorothy accepted the money. "May God bless you," she said, tears in her eyes. On the drive home, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the two girls. There was something about Em that deeply intrigued him. She'd shown a courage and selflessness he rarely saw in adults, let alone children. The next morning, Richard went straight to his office, located on the top floor of a commercial building in downtown New York City. His assistant, Margaret, an efficient woman in her 40s who'd worked with him for over a decade, was already waiting with his schedule. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I saw the news about the restaurant incident yesterday. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Margaret. Thanks to a very brave girl. I need you to do some research for me." "Of course, what do you need?" "I want to know everything about an employee named Paul who worked at the Pinnacle, and also about the two girls who helped me yesterday." Richard gave Margaret the details he had about Em and Sophie, asking her to discreetly look into their circumstances. "Sir, may I ask why the research?" Richard hesitated. He wasn't sure how to explain the impulse he felt to help those girls. "Let's just say I have a debt of gratitude to repay." Throughout the morning, Richard tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the previous day's incident. Who would want to poison his food? And why? His phone rang around 10. It was the police investigator. "Mr. Thompson, we have updates on the case. The lab's preliminary analysis detected traces of a substance that could have caused serious health issues if ingested." Richard felt a chill. "What kind of substance?" "We're still analyzing, but it appears to be something that would cause symptoms similar to severe food poisoning, possibly fatal in large enough quantities." "And the employee, Paul?" "Disappeared. The address he gave the restaurant is fake, and the documents he provided seem forged. We're working on the theory that he was hired specifically for this job." Richard hung up, his hand trembling slightly. Someone had actually tried to kill him, and likely would have succeeded if not for the intervention of a 10-year-old girl. Margaret walked into his office a few hours later with a folder in hand. "I got the information you asked for, Mr. Thompson. About Paul, the police already gave me the main details. But about the girls." She opened the folder and placed some papers on the desk. Emily Wilson, 10 years old, and Sophie Wilson, 7 years old. Orphaned from both mother and father, they were under the care of their maternal grandmother, Dolores Wilson, who passed away 8 months ago from diabetes complications. Richard studied the documents. And since then? Officially, they're under the temporary care of Dorothy Jenkins, a neighbor, but there's nothing formal. The girls should be in a shelter or with a foster family. Why aren't they? Dorothy told me Emily ran away from the first shelter they were taken to, said she didn't want to be separated from her sister. Since then, they've sort of disappeared from the system. Richard absorbed this information slowly. What about school? Neither of them is currently enrolled. Emily stopped attending after losing her grandmother. The girls' situation was even worse than Richard had imagined. They were living completely outside the system, with no formal education, no official protection, relying only on the kindness of a neighbor who could barely support her own family. "Margaret, I want you to arrange a meeting with me and Mrs. Dorothy. I need to talk to her about the girls." "Sir, may I ask what your intentions are?" Richard looked out his office window, watching the frantic movement of the city below. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know I can't just turn my back on those girls after one of them saved my life." The following afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy came to Richard's office. She was clearly nervous, wearing her best clothes, which were still simple and worn. Margaret greeted her kindly and led her to the meeting room. "Mrs. Dorothy, thank you for coming," said Richard, standing to greet her. "Mr. Richard, I don't quite understand why you called me here. Did the girls do something wrong?" "On the contrary, I'm here because Emily did something extraordinarily right, and because I want to better understand your situation." Richard offered coffee and talked with Mrs. Dorothy about the girls' circumstances. She confirmed everything Margaret had uncovered and added details that made the situation even more heartbreaking. "Sir, I do what I can, but the truth is I can barely support my own family. My husband is unemployed, and I earn very little as a cleaner. The girls are angels, never any trouble, but they deserve more than I can give them." "What would happen if they went back into the official system?" Mrs. Dorothy sighed sadly. "They'd probably be separated. Sophie is younger and has a better chance of being adopted. Em is older, and on top of that, she's stubborn and protective of her sister. It's unlikely they'd find a family willing to take both." "And do they know this?" "Em knows. That's why she runs away every time someone from the government shows up. She'd rather go hungry than be separated from Sophie." Richard felt a tightening in his chest. Em's loyalty to her sister reminded him of his own feelings toward his younger brother during childhood. "Mrs. Dorothy, what if there was another option? What if someone wanted to take care of both girls, keeping them together?" The woman looked at him with a mix of hope and skepticism. "Sir, people like us don't usually get that kind of luck in life. But what if you did? I just want them to be happy and have the chance to study, to have a better life than mine." Richard nodded, processing everything he'd heard. "Thank you for being so honest with me, Mrs. Dorothy. I'd like to ask a favor. Could you bring the girls here tomorrow? I'd like to talk to them." "Of course, Mr. Richard, but may I ask what you're thinking?" Richard hesitated. He wasn't even sure himself. "Let's just say I'm considering a way to repay Em for what she did for me." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He paced around his luxurious apartment, a 3,000-square-foot penthouse in the most upscale neighborhood of New York City, thinking about his conversation with Mrs. Dorothy. He had built a business empire, amassed a fortune that allowed for every imaginable luxury, but he lived alone. His ex-wife had left him 5 years earlier, tired of being sidelined by his work. They'd never had children, something she'd always wanted, but he'd always postponed because of his career. Now, at 45, Richard found himself questioning his priorities. The attempt on his life had been a wake-up call. How many enemies had he made over the years in pursuit of success? And for what? To die alone? Poisoned in some expensive restaurant? The image of Em risking her own safety to save a stranger still haunted him. When was the last time he'd done something truly selfless? The next morning, Mrs. Dorothy arrived at the office with the two girls. Em was wearing the same clothes as the day before, but Sophie had on a colorful dress that, though old, was impeccably clean and pressed. "Uncle Richard," Sophie exclaimed as soon as she saw him, running to hug his legs. Richard was surprised by the little girl's spontaneous affection. "Hello, Sophie. You look very pretty today. Mrs. Dorothy fixed me up special to come see you," she explained proudly. Em was more reserved, observing everything around her with curiosity, but keeping a protective stance toward her sister. "Em, how are you?" Richard asked. "Fine, Uncle Richard. Thank you for taking care of us yesterday." Richard led them to his private office, where he'd asked Margaret to arrange some snacks and juice for the girls. "Girls, I wanted to talk to you about some important things. First, I want you to know that man at the restaurant really did put something dangerous in my food. Em, you literally saved my life." Em lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what I thought was right, Uncle. And that's exactly what impressed me," Richard continued. "Very few people would have the courage to do what you did." He sat down across from the two girls, choosing his words carefully. "Em, Sophie, I'd like to make a proposal to you, but first, I want you to tell me one thing. If you could change anything about your lives, what would it be?" Sophie answered immediately. "I'd want to go back to school. I love learning to read." Em took longer to respond. "I'd want Sophie to have all the things other kids have. Toys, pretty clothes, food on the table every day. And I'd want her to go to a good school." "And for you, Em? What would you want for yourself?" The girl was silent for a long moment. "I just want to stay with Sophie. I don't care about anything else, as long as she's okay." Em's answer moved Richard deeply. At 10 years old, she'd already developed a sense of sacrifice and responsibility that many adults lacked. "What if I told you there's a way for you to have all that and still stay together?" The two girls looked at him with a mix of hope and wariness. "How, Uncle?" Sophie asked. Richard took a deep breath. He was about to make one of the most important decisions of his life. "I'd like to adopt both of you, to give you a home, an education, and everything you need to have a good life." The silence that followed was profound. Em widened her eyes, while Sophie looked from her sister to Richard, trying to understand what this meant. "Adopt us," Em repeated slowly. "You mean we'd live with you?" "If you want to, yes. You'd have your own rooms, go to a good school, have everything you need, and most importantly, you'd stay together." Sophie visibly lit up, but Em remained cautious. "Why would you do this for us, Uncle Richard? We barely know each other." It was a remarkably mature question for a 10-year-old, and Richard respected her for asking it. "Because you showed me there's still genuine kindness in this world, Em, and because I believe you both deserve the same opportunities I had in life. But what if you change your mind later? What if we do something wrong?" Richard knelt in front of Em, looking straight into her eyes. "Em, I grew up in a situation like yours. I know what it's like to be afraid of not having a home, of not knowing if there'll be food tomorrow. If I decide to adopt you, it'll be forever. You'll never have to be afraid of being alone again." Tears began streaming down Em's face. "What about Mrs. Dorothy? We can't just leave her." "It wouldn't be leaving her. It'd be growing, and I'm sure Mrs. Dorothy would be happy knowing you have a chance at a better life." Sophie moved closer to Em and took her hand. "Em, do you think we can trust Uncle Richard?" Em studied Richard's face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I think so, Sophie. I think he's a good man." "So we can live with him?" Sophie asked hopefully. Em looked at Richard again. "Are you sure you want two troublemakers like us?" Richard smiled. "I'm sure I want two brave, loyal girls like you." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. After discussing more practical details about the adoption, Richard called Mrs. Dorothy to explain his proposal. The woman was moved by the possibility of the girls getting a better chance in life. "Mr. Richard, I always knew these girls were special. They deserve all the good in the world. And you, Mrs. Dorothy, will always be welcome in their lives. I don't want them to lose touch with the people who cared for them." In the following days, Richard began the legal adoption process. He soon realized it would be more complicated than he'd imagined, especially since the girls weren't officially in the system. Margaret helped him hire the best family law attorneys. Practical preparations also began to welcome the girls into his home. Richard hired a decorator to turn 2 spare rooms into proper spaces for children. He wanted each girl to have her own space, but also to feel like part of a family. During this time, he visited the girls in Hopeville almost every day. He brought food, books, and gradually got to know their personalities better. Em was extremely smart and observant, but carried the weight of having cared for her younger sister from an early age. She devoured every book Richard brought and asked sharp questions about everything. Sophie was more spontaneous and affectionate, with a vivid imagination and a smile that lit up any room. She quickly started calling Richard Daddy Richard, which touched him deeply. 2 weeks after the initial proposal, Richard received a troubling call from his lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, we have a problem. Someone is contesting the adoption." "What do you mean? Who?" "A woman named Susan Wilson is claiming to be the girl's biological mother and wants custody of them." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "But the girls told me their mother abandoned them when Sophie was born." "Apparently, she's resurfaced and is claiming she wants her daughters back. She has legal rights as their biological mother." Richard hung up the phone, his heart racing. How would he explain this to the girls? They had finally started to believe they would have a stable family, and now this. He decided to go to Hopeville in person to talk to Em and Sophie before they heard it from someone else. When he arrived, he found the girls playing in Mrs. Dorothy's backyard. When they saw him, Sophie ran to hug him as she always did. "Daddy Richard, Em was teaching me to read better with the book you brought." Richard knelt to hug Sophie, but his heart was heavy with the news he had to share. "Girls, I need to talk to you about something important. Let's sit down." Em immediately sensed something was wrong. Her expression grew tense and protective. "What happened, Uncle Richard? Did you change your mind about the adoption?" "No, Em, I haven't changed my mind. But there's been a complication. Your mother, Susan, has come forward and says she wants you back." Em's face went pale. Sophie, who had been born when their mother abandoned them, looked confused. "Mommy Susan?" Sophie asked. "But I thought she was gone forever." Em took her sister's hand, her protective instincts kicking in. "She left, Sophie. She left us with Grandma and never came back. But now she wants you back," Richard explained gently. "And because she's your biological mother, the law might force you to go with her." "No," Sophie cried, clinging to Richard. "I don't want to go. I want to stay with you." Em was visibly struggling to keep her composure. "Why is she coming back now, Uncle Richard? Where has she been all these years?" "I don't know, Em, but we'll find out. I promise I'll fight for you to stay with me if that's what you want." "It is," Em said firmly. "She can't just show up after all this time and take us back like nothing happened." Richard admired the girl's strength, but he knew the legal battle would be complicated. Biological mothers had strong rights under U.S. law. In the following days, Richard threw himself into preparing for the legal fight. He hired investigators to find out where Susan had been all these years and why she had decided to return now. What they uncovered was disturbing. Susan had gotten involved with drugs after abandoning her daughters and had spent the last few years in and out of rehab clinics. Recently, she had learned about Richard's planned adoption through acquaintances in Hopeville. "Here's the thing," the private investigator told Richard. "She showed no interest in the girls until she found out a wealthy man wanted to adopt them. Do you think she's trying to extort money? It's possible. Or maybe she genuinely believes she can use this to rebuild her life." Richard felt a mix of anger and pity. Regardless of Susan's motives, Em and Sophie would be the ones to suffer the most from all this. The first court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Richard decided to be completely honest with the girls about what might happen. "The judge will hear both sides," he explained. My lawyers will argue that you're better off with me, and your mother's lawyers will argue that she has the right to raise you. What if the judge decides we have to go with her? Em asked, her voice small and frightened. Richard felt his heart break. He had promised those girls they would never have to be afraid again, and now he couldn't guarantee that. If this happens, I'll keep fighting. I'll appeal the decision. I'll do everything in my power. But it might not work, said Em, ever the realist. It might not, admitted Richard. But I promise I won't give up on you. Sophie began to cry. I don't remember Mommy Susan. I don't want to go with her. I want to stay here with you. Richard picked her up, feeling powerless in the face of her pain. We won't let this happen if we can help it, he promised. The night before the hearing, Richard barely slept. He had done everything he could, hired the best lawyers, gathered evidence of Susan's unstable life, and prepared arguments for why it would be better for the girls to stay with him. But deep down, he knew he couldn't compete with the biological bond. No matter how much he loved those girls, no matter how much they loved him back, he wasn't their father. The hearing was held at the Central Courthouse in New York City. Richard arrived early with his lawyers and found Em and Sophie waiting with Mrs. Dorothy, who had offered to accompany them. The girls were dressed in simple but clean clothes. Em held Sophie's hand tightly, and both looked frightened by the formal courtroom setting. How are you doing? Richard asked, kneeling in front of them. Scared, admitted Sophie. What if Mommy Susan is mean to us? She won't be, Richard tried to reassure her, though he wasn't sure himself. When Susan arrived, Richard saw her for the first time. She was a woman in her 30s, too thin, with unkempt hair and clothes that had seen better days. She looked at her daughters with an expression mixing nervousness and determination. Em? Sophie? She called hesitantly. Em instinctively pulled Sophie behind her, her protective instincts kicking in. Hello, Mum, she said politely but without warmth. Sophie hid behind Richard, clearly frightened. The hearing was painful. Susan argued she had overcome her drug problems and wanted a second chance to be a mother. Richard's lawyers presented evidence of her unstable life and argued the girls had found stability and love in his home. The hardest moment came when the judge asked to speak to the girls separately. Em went first, and when she returned, she was visibly shaken. What did he ask? Richard whispered. If I wanted to go with Mommy Susan or stay with you, Em replied, her voice trembling. I said I wanted to stay with you, but he said it wasn't a decision I could make alone. When it was Sophie's turn, she started crying before even entering the judge's chambers. Richard wanted to scoop her up and run. After 2 hours of arguments and testimonies, the judge announced he needed time to review the case. The decision would be communicated in a week. That was the longest week of Richard's life. He continued visiting the girls daily, trying to maintain normalcy, but everyone was on edge. Em had become even more protective of Sophie, rarely letting her out of her sight. Sophie, in turn, clung to Richard whenever he arrived, as if afraid he might leave and never return. During that week, Susan also made a few supervised visits with the girls. Richard heard from Mrs. Dorothy that the visits weren't going well. The girls get tense when she arrives, Mrs. Dorothy reported. Sophie hides and Em is polite but distant. It's obvious they're not comfortable with her. And Susan, how does she react? She tries, but it's like she doesn't know how to be a mother. She talks to them like they're strangers. On the day of the decision, Richard was so nervous he could barely eat breakfast. He arrived at the courthouse an hour early and paced the halls, trying to calm himself. When the girls arrived with Mrs. Dorothy, Em immediately ran to him. Uncle Richard, I'm really scared. Me too, Em. But no matter what happens, I'll always love you both. We love you too, said Sophie, hugging his legs. The hearing was shorter than the last one. The judge simply read his decision without allowing additional arguments. After carefully reviewing all aspects of this case, he began, considering the minors' well-being, their stated preferences, and the stability of the environments offered, I rule that... Richard held his breath. Temporary custody will be granted to the biological mother, Susan Wilson, under the condition of strict supervision by social services for the next 6 months. Richard's world crumbled. Beside him, Sophie burst into loud sobs, while M turned pale as a ghost. However, the judge continued, due to the special circumstances of this case and the bond already established, I grant extensive visitation rights to Mr. Richard Thompson, and I order that any decision regarding future adoption be reassessed after the supervision period. Richard barely processed the rest of the judge's words. The girls had to go with Susan, but he'd still have a chance to see them and possibly reverse the situation later. When the hearing ended, the girls clung to Richard, crying, "We don't want to go, Daddy Richard." Sophie wept. "Please don't let her take us," Em begged. Richard's heart was breaking, but he knew he had to stay strong for them. "Listen to me," he said, kneeling in front of them. "You'll be okay. I'll visit every week, and in 6 months we can try again. Just be brave a little longer." "What if she won't let you visit?" Em asked. "The judge said I can. If she tries to stop me, we'll come right back here." Susan approached hesitantly. "Girls, I'm so happy you're coming with me. We'll be a family again." Em looked at her with an expression far older than her 10 years. "We were never a family before. Why would it be different now?" The brutal honesty of the question left Susan speechless. Saying goodbye was the hardest thing Richard had ever done. Sophie clung to him, refusing to let go, while Em tried to be brave, but was visibly shattered. "Promise you'll visit?" Em asked. "I promise, and I promise I'll keep fighting for you." Richard watched as Susan led the girls away, feeling as if part of himself had been torn out. In the days that followed, Richard became obsessed with the girls' well-being. He hired investigators to discreetly monitor their situation and made sure social services were fulfilling their supervisory duties. The news wasn't good. Susan had taken them to a small, poorly maintained apartment in a dangerous part of town. She was trying to find work, but her lack of skills and history with drugs made it difficult. Worse, investigators reported that Susan often left the girls alone to go out with friends. Em had gone back to taking care of Sophie, just like the old days. When Richard finally got his first official visit a week later, he was shocked by what he found. The apartment was cramped and stuffy, with only one bedroom for all 3 of them. The girls looked thin and sad. "Uncle Richard!" Sophie shouted, running to hug him. Em rushed to him too, but Richard could see in her eyes she was fighting back tears. "How are you holding up?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "We're fine," lied Em, always trying to protect everyone around. "No, we're not," contradicted Sophie. "Mom Susan goes out every night, and we're left alone, and there's hardly anything to eat." Susan, who was watching TV in the living room, heard the comment and got defensive. "I'm looking for work. It's hard to start a new life." Richard held back from exploding. Instead, he focused on the girls. "I brought some things for you," he said, handing over bags with clothes, books, and food. "Thank you, Uncle Richard," said Em, but her voice was lifeless. During the 2-hour visit, Richard noticed how much the girls had changed. Sophie, once spontaneous and cheerful, was clingy and scared. Em had retreated into survival mode, taking on responsibilities she shouldn't have. "Girls," he whispered when Susan stepped out to take a call. "If anything bad happens, you call me immediately, okay?" "Mom, Susan won't let us use the phone," said Sophie. Richard discreetly handed a simple cell phone to Em. "Hide this. It's only for emergencies." When it was time to leave, Richard felt like he was abandoning the girls all over again. "I'll be back next week," he promised. "Can you take us away next time?" Sophie asked hopefully. Richard had to hold back tears. "Not yet, sweetheart, but I'm working on it." The next few weeks were torture. Richard visited the girls religiously, but with each visit they seemed worse. Susan was clearly struggling to care for them, and her frustration was growing. During the 4th visit, Richard noticed a bruise on Em's arm. "What happened to your arm?" he asked worriedly. Em glanced quickly at Susan before answering. "I fell." Richard didn't believe her, but he couldn't do much without concrete proof. That night, he called his lawyers. "I need to get those girls out of there. I'm sure they're being mistreated. Mr. Thompson, we need solid evidence. Suspicions aren't enough to overturn a court decision." Then how do we get proof? Keep documenting everything. If there's real abuse, signs will eventually show up that can't be ignored. Richard felt powerless. He had all the money in the world, but couldn't protect two girls he loved. The situation came to a head 2 weeks later. Richard got a call in the middle of the night from the phone he'd given Em. "Uncle Richard?" Em's voice was a scared whisper. "Em, what's wrong?" "Mom Susan brought some strange men home. They're drinking and being loud. One tried to get into our room. We're hiding in the bathroom." Richard jumped out of bed. "Where exactly are you?" "In the bathroom. I locked the door, but I'm scared." "I'll call the police and come right now. Don't leave the bathroom until I get there." Richard called the police as he ran to his car. He arrived at Susan's apartment at the same time as the patrol car. They found Susan visibly drunk, with 3 men Richard didn't recognize. The girls were still locked in the bathroom, terrified. "It's him, it's Uncle Richard," Sophie shouted when she heard his voice. Richard had to restrain himself from punching the wall. The girls were in dirty pajamas, clearly hungry and scared. "It's okay now," he said, hugging them both. "You're safe." The police arrested the men for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Susan was taken in for questioning, leaving the girls temporarily with Richard. "You can keep them until we sort things out with social services," the officer in charge said. Richard took Em and Sophie to his home, where they finally slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The next morning, his lawyers filed an emergency petition to revoke Susan's custody, using the incident from the previous night as evidence that the girls were in danger. "This is our chance," the lead attorney told Richard. "Yesterday's incident proves Susan isn't providing a safe environment for the girls." The emergency hearing moved quickly. Within 3 days, Richard was back in court, this time with far more confidence. Susan showed up, visibly shaken and accompanied by a public defender. She tried to argue that the incident had been a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. The social services report documented multiple violations of the custody conditions. Susan had left the girls alone on several occasions, failed to ensure proper meals, and now had exposed the children to a potentially dangerous situation. When the judge called the girls to speak this time, they were much more direct about their feelings. Em talked about the nights they'd spent alone, the lack of food, and how scared they were of Susan's visitors. Sophie simply cried and asked to go back to Daddy Richard's house. The decision was unanimous and immediate. Considering the evidence presented and the clear risk to the minors' well-being, the judge declared, "I hereby revoke Mrs. Susan Wilson's custody and grant temporary custody to Mr. Richard Thompson, with the intent of proceeding toward full adoption." Richard felt like he could fly. The girls, who had been waiting outside the courtroom, ran to him when they heard the news. "Can we go home now, Daddy Richard?" Sophie asked. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home for good." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. But their joy was cut short by a disturbing discovery the following week. Richard received a call from a private investigator he'd hired to uncover who had tried to poison him at the restaurant. "Mr. Thompson, we've found something important about the attempt on your life." "What did you find?" The man who called himself Paul was hired by someone connected to Susan Wilson. Richard's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "It seems Susan found out about your plans to adopt the girls through contacts in the neighborhood. She reached out to some, let's say, unsavory individuals to try and eliminate you before the adoption was finalized." "She tried to kill me?" "Apparently, yes. The idea was that with you out of the way, she could reclaim the girls and potentially sue your estate for emotional damages." Richard was stunned. Susan hadn't just abandoned her daughters. She'd tried to murder the only person who wanted to care for them. "Do you have proof of this?" "We're gathering evidence. Paul was arrested yesterday and is cooperating with the investigation." Richard hung up the phone with shaking hands. The woman who had tried to kill him was the same person the legal system had entrusted with Em and Sophie's custody. He decided not to tell the girls about this discovery right away. They'd already endured enough trauma. Over the following weeks, Richard devoted himself entirely to helping the girls adjust to their new life. He hired a child psychologist to help them process everything they'd been through. Em struggled to believe their stability was real. She'd spent so long taking care of Sophie and worrying about survival that she didn't know how to just be a child. "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and think I'll be back in Mommy Susan's apartment," she confessed during a therapy session. "It's normal to feel that way," the psychologist explained. "You've been through so many changes. It will take time to feel completely safe." Sophie was adjusting more quickly, but still had nightmares and bouts of anxiety. Richard started sleeping with his bedroom door open so he could hear her if she needed help during the night. 1 month after returning to Richard's home, he finally felt ready to talk to the girls about the attempted murder. "Girls, I need to tell you something about what happened at the restaurant that day." They sat beside him on the couch, attentive. "We found out who sent the man to put poison in my food." "Who was it?" asked Em. Richard hesitated, knowing this revelation would be hard. "It was your mother, Susan. She found out about the adoption and tried to eliminate me so she could have you." Em paled, but didn't seem entirely surprised. "I knew she didn't come back for us," she said quietly. "She only wanted money." Sophie looked confused. "But why would she do something so awful?" "Some people make very bad choices when they're desperate," Richard explained carefully. "Your mother has problems she can't solve on her own." "And what will happen to her now?" asked Em. "She'll stand trial for what she did, and you'll never have to worry about her trying to take you away again." Em was silent for a long moment. "I should be sad," she finally said, "but I'm not. I just feel relief." Richard hugged both girls. "It's normal to feel that way. You don't owe anything to someone who hurt you." In the months that followed, the new family found their rhythm. Richard enrolled the girls in the best private school in the area. Em, who had missed nearly a year of school, needed tutoring to catch up, but her natural intelligence helped her recover quickly. Sophie flourished in the school environment. She made friends easily and discovered a passion for art. Richard turned one of the spare rooms into a studio for her. Em, more reserved, took longer to adjust socially but excelled academically. She developed a particular love for math and science. Richard also made changes in his own life. He delegated more responsibilities at work so he could spend more time with the girls. He started working from home some afternoons to be there when they returned from school. "Daddy Richard," Sophie said one day as they did homework together, "are you happy with us here?" The question caught Richard off guard. "Of course I am, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes you look sad when you think we're not growing up right." Richard realized the girls were more observant than he'd thought. "Sometimes I worry if I'm being a good father to you," he admitted. "I've never been a dad before, so I don't always know if I'm doing things right." "You're the best dad in the world," Sophie said with conviction. Em, listening from the nearby table, looked up from her book. "Uncle Richard, you saved our lives. How could you think you're not a good father? It's just, you lost so much of your childhood. You had to grow up too fast. Sometimes I feel guilty for not coming into your lives sooner." Em closed her book and moved closer to him. "If you had come sooner, maybe we wouldn't have been ready to save you that day at the restaurant. Maybe everything happened at the right time." Em's wisdom never failed to amaze Richard. At 11 years old, she had a perspective on life many adults lacked. 6 months after the girls moved into Richard's home, the adoption process was finally completed. Richard officially became the legal father of Emily and Sophie Wilson Thompson. The courthouse ceremony was simple but deeply moving. Mrs. Dorothy was there, proud of the girls she had helped raise. Margaret, Richard's assistant, brought a cake to celebrate. "Now we're officially a family," said Richard as he signed the final papers. "We were already a family," Emily corrected with a smile. "Now it's just on paper." That evening, they threw a small party at home. Richard had invited a few close friends and the girls' co-workers. During the celebration, Richard gave a short speech. "A year ago, I was a lonely man who thought success was measured only by the money in the bank. 2 extraordinary girls showed me that family and love are the only riches that truly matter. And you showed us that there are still good people in the world, Emily replied, surprising everyone with her maturity. Life moved forward peacefully over the next few months. Richard discovered joys he'd never experienced before, helping with homework, attending school plays, taking the girls to the park. Emily developed an interest in computer programming, which surprised Richard. She had found some of his old technical books and started studying them on her own. "Daddy Richard, can you teach me how computers work?" she asked one day. "Of course, but why are you interested in this?" "Because I want to understand how things work, and maybe one day I can help you with the company." Richard was touched by Emily's desire to follow in his footsteps, but also concerned. "Em, you don't have to work at my company if you don't want to. You can choose any career that makes you happy." "I know, but I like solving problems, and you always say work is like solving giant puzzles." Richard began dedicating a few hours each week to teaching Emily basic programming. She absorbed the knowledge at an impressive speed. Sophie, meanwhile, was flourishing artistically. Her paintings and drawings decorated the entire house, and Richard felt proud every time he looked at them. "One day, I'll hold an exhibition just for Sophie's work," he told Margaret one day at the office. "You've turned into such a doting father," Margaret laughed, "but it's beautiful to see." A year after the adoption, Richard received an unexpected invitation. The girls' school wanted to honor him at a recognition ceremony for fathers who made a difference in the school community. "But I haven't done anything special," Richard protested when the principal called. "Mr. Thompson, your daughters are examples of resilience and determination, and everyone knows that's because of the love and support you give them. We want to recognize that." Richard was embarrassed, but the girls were thrilled. "Daddy, Richard, you have to accept," Sophie insisted. "Everyone at school talks about how great you are," Emily added. The ceremony took place in the school auditorium, with other families in attendance. Richard felt proud when his name was called, but what moved him most was seeing Emily and Sophie cheering enthusiastically from the audience. During his brief speech, Richard spoke about how the girls had changed his life. "Many people think adoption is about adults helping children, but in my case, it was two extraordinary children who saved a lost adult. They taught me the true meaning of family and unconditional love." After the ceremony, many parents approached Richard to talk. Some shared their own adoption experiences, while others simply wanted to congratulate him. One mother in particular stood out. "Mr. Thompson, my son is in the same class as Emily. He always talks about how smart and kind she is. It's clear you're raising two wonderful girls." On the way home, Emily was thoughtful. "Daddy Richard, do you regret adopting us?" The question caught Richard completely by surprise. "Why would you ask something like that, Em?" "Because your life was simpler before we came along. You didn't have to worry about school clothes, whether we were eating right." Richard pulled the car over to the first safe spot he found and turned to look at the two girls in the back seat. "Girls, listen to me carefully. My life before you was empty. I had money, success, everything I thought I wanted, but I didn't have love. I didn't have a real purpose. You gave me a reason to live I didn't even know I was searching for." "But isn't it a lot of work taking care of us?" Sophie asked. "The best kind of work is the work we do out of love," Richard replied. "And there's no greater love than what I feel for the two of you." The girls smiled, reassured. "We love you too, Daddy Richard," said Em, "and we promise to always make you proud of us." "You already do every single day," Richard answered, moved. 2 years after the adoption, the family's life had found a perfect balance. Em, now 13, had grown into a bright and determined teenager. Her grades were excellent, and she was already standing out in coding competitions. Sophie, at 9, had developed a vibrant artistic personality. Her paintings were becoming more sophisticated, and she had started taking private art lessons. Richard had found the perfect balance between work and family. His company remained prosperous, but he had learned to delegate and prioritize family time above all else. One evening during dinner, Em made an unexpected announcement. "Daddy Richard, I've decided what I want to do when I grow up." "What is it, sweetheart?" "I want to work with technology to help kids in situations like ours. I want to create programs and apps that connect children in need with families who want to adopt." Richard smiled, proud of his daughter's compassion. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Em, And if you'd like, I can help you develop it." "Really?" M's eyes lit up. "Really? We can start it as a family project. Sophie can help with the visual design, you with the coding, and I'll handle the business side." "And we can call it the Hope Project," Sophie suggested excitedly. "Perfect," Richard agreed. In the following months, the family worked together on developing the project. Richard turned a room in their house into an office where they gathered in the afternoons and on weekends to bring the idea to life. Em amazed everyone with her programming skills. At 13, she was writing complex code that even impressed the professional developers Richard consulted. Sophie contributed colorful designs and intuitive interfaces that made the app appealing to children. Richard handled the legal and business aspects, ensuring the project met all necessary regulations. The Hope Project started as a simple online platform connecting children's shelters with families interested in adoption, but it gradually grew into something more. "What if we added a section where older kids could share their own stories?" Em suggested during one of their work sessions. "How do you mean?" Richard asked. "Well, a lot of people are hesitant to adopt older kids because they don't really know who they are. If they could introduce themselves through videos or writing, maybe more families would be interested." The idea was brilliant. Richard was struck by Em's maturity and insight. "And we could have a success stories section too," Sophie added, "to show that adoption works out." "Our story could be the first one," Richard said, smiling. Working on the project brought the family even closer together. They would spend hours discussing ideas, testing features, and dreaming about the impact they could have. "Imagine how many children we can help find families," Em said one evening. "And how many families we can help find children," Richard added. 6 months later, the Hope Project was ready to launch. Richard organized a small presentation for friends, colleagues, and professionals in the adoption field. Em, despite her natural shyness, gave an impressive presentation about the technology behind the project. "This app isn't just about connecting people," she explained. "It's about giving hope to children who think they'll never have a family and showing adults that there's enough love in the world for everyone." Sophie presented the visual design, explaining how every color and shape was chosen to convey warmth and optimism. Richard concluded by speaking about the project's importance to his family. "This project was born from love and gratitude. 3 years ago, 2 extraordinary girls saved my life in more ways than one. Now, we want to use our experience to save other lives." The presentation was a success. Several adoption organizations expressed interest in partnerships, and some investors offered financial support. But for Richard, the greatest success was seeing the pride in his daughter's eyes. "Daddy Richard," Em said after the presentation, "thank you for believing in us." "Thank you for letting us help other kids like us," Sophie added. "Thank you for showing me that true success isn't measured in money, but in lives touched and hearts brought together," Richard replied. The Hope Project officially launched 3 months later. In its first year, it helped connect over 50 children with adoptive families in the New York City area. Em, now 14, had become a minor celebrity in the tech world. Her story of resilience and her early talent attracted local media attention. "Em, a TV station wants to do a story about you and the project," Richard said one day. "Only if Sophie and you are in it too," she replied. "This project is ours, not just mine." The segment aired on a Sunday program telling the family's full story, from their meeting at the restaurant to the development of the Hope Project. The response was greater than they expected. Dozens of families reached out interested in adoption, and several organizations offered partnerships, but perhaps the most touching feedback came from children in shelters. "Daddy Richard, we got a letter," Sophie said a few days after the segment. It was from a 12-year-old girl named Bethany, who had been in a shelter for 3 years. "Dear Thompson family," the letter read, "I saw you on TV and wanted to write to say thank you. It's not easy being in a shelter, and sometimes we lose hope of ever having a family. But seeing how it worked out for Em and Sophie gives me hope that it can work for me too. Thank you for creating the Hope Project. Now I believe I'll find my family one day." Richard read the letter aloud during dinner and everyone was moved. "We have to write back to her," Em said immediately. "Of course we will," Richard agreed. And we'll visit her too, if she'd like. That was the first of many letters they received. Gradually, the family began making regular visits to shelters in the area, not to select children, but to offer hope and show that adoption worked. "You don't know the impact you have when you visit here," the director of one shelter told Richard. "The kids are excited for days after you leave." "It's important they know they haven't been forgotten," Em replied. "When I was in their situation, sometimes I felt like no one cared about us." During one of these visits, they met Michael, an 8-year-old boy who had been abandoned by his parents 2 years earlier. He was shy and withdrawn, but immediately connected with Sophie. "He reminds me of us when we were younger," Sophie commented on the way home. "How so?" asked Richard. "He has that look of someone trying to be strong, but is scared inside." Richard watched through the rearview mirror as Sophie, now 10 years old, displayed impressive empathy and maturity. In subsequent visits, Michael always sought out the family. He began to open up, sharing his fears and hopes. "Do you think someone will want to adopt me one day?" he asked Emily during one visit. "I'm sure of it," Emily replied. "You're smart, funny, and have a good heart. Any family would be lucky to have you." "But what if I don't get along with them? What if they don't like me later?" "You know, Michael, I had the same fears," Emily admitted. "But Daddy Richard showed us that real family is built with patience and love. If it's the right family, they'll love you, not despite your fears, but including them." A few months later, Richard received a call from the shelter director. "Mr. Thompson, a family interested in adopting Michael has come forward. They'll meet him next week. He specifically asked if you could be there during the visit." "Of course," Richard answered immediately. "We'll be there." On the day of the visit, Richard arrived at the shelter with the girls and found Michael visibly nervous. "What if they don't like me?" he asked anxiously. "Michael," Sophie said, holding his hand, "remember when we met Daddy Richard? I was so scared I could barely speak, but he was patient and kind, and now we're a real family. What if this family is different? Then they won't be the right family for you," Emily said pragmatically. "But that doesn't mean you won't find the right family. It just means you have to keep waiting." The family interested in Michael arrived an hour later, a middle-aged couple, Charles and Anna, who had lost the ability to have biological children years before. Richard watched their interaction with Michael. The boy was shy at first, but gradually opened up when he realized Charles and Anna were genuinely interested in getting to know him. "Michael loves to draw," Sophie said, helping break the ice. "He made a beautiful drawing for me last time we were here." "Really?" Anna said, smiling. "I work as an art teacher. I'd love to see your drawings." Michael's eyes lit up. "You teach drawing?" "I do. And if you come live with us, I can teach you new techniques if you'd like." Richard saw the magical moment happen, the moment Michael completely relaxed and began imagining a life with Charles and Anna. "Do you have other children?" Michael asked. "No," Charles replied. "You'd be our first child, our complete family." "Like we are for Daddy Richard," Sophie said spontaneously. 3 weeks later, Michael moved into Charles and Anna's home. The goodbye was emotional, but full of hope. "Thank you for believing in me," Michael said to the Thompson family. "You showed me it's worth waiting for the right family." "And you showed us our mission is just beginning," Richard replied. The success of Michael's adoption inspired Richard to expand the Hope Project. They created a network of volunteer families who regularly visited shelters, offering emotional support and mentorship to children awaiting adoption. "It's not just about finding families," Emily explained during a meeting with volunteers. "It's about making these children feel seen and valued while they wait." The project grew organically. Soon there were volunteers at 10 different shelters in the New York City area. Sophie set up art workshops for the children, while Em taught basic coding to the teenagers. Richard coordinated everything, but what made him proudest was seeing how his daughters had become natural leaders, inspiring others through their compassion and determination. 3 years after launching the Hope Project, they organized the first family gathering, an event where adoptive families and children from shelters came together to celebrate and share experiences. "This event isn't about adoption," Richard explained during his opening speech. "It's about community. It's about showing that all of us, no matter how our families were formed, are part of something bigger. M, now 17 and about to start college, gave a presentation on the project's results. In 3 years, we've helped facilitate 120 successful adoptions, but more important than the numbers is the human impact. We've changed the narrative around adoption, showing that it's about love, not charity. Sophie, 13 and already a talented artist, had created an art exhibit featuring works from children across multiple shelters. Art is a way for children to express themselves and show their unique personalities, she explained. When families see these pieces, they see the children as creative, special individuals, not just as kids in need. The event was a resounding success. Several families made connections that would eventually lead to adoptions, but more importantly, the entire community felt united around a shared purpose. During the event, Richard got an unexpected surprise. Susan, his ex-wife, showed up to greet him. "Richard, I saw the news segment about the project on TV. I'm so proud of what you've built." "Thank you, Susan. That means a lot, coming from you. I always knew you had a big heart. It just took the right people for you to realize it too." Richard introduced Susan to Em and Sophie. The conversation was warm, and Susan was impressed by the girls' maturity and grace. "You're lucky to have a father like Richard," she told them. "We know," Em replied, smiling, "and he's lucky to have us too." Susan laughed. "That's true. You two are clearly the best thing that ever happened to him." That night, after all the guests had left, the family sat in the living room reflecting on the day. "I'm so proud of you both," Richard said. "Seeing the compassionate, determined young women you've become is my greatest achievement in life." "Daddy Richard," Em said, "I have a confession to make." "What is it?" "Sometimes I still can't believe all of this is real. That we went from living in that slum to this. It feels like a dream." "Me too," Sophie admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and I'm surprised to be in my own room, with my own books and paints." Richard's heart tightened. "And sometimes I can't believe how lonely I was before you two came along. I can't imagine my life without you now." "So we're all living the same dream," Em said, smiling. "The best kind of dream," Sophie added. "The kind that comes true." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share, leave us an honest comment. Do you think Richard made the right choice? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.